With the midterms less than 100 days away, new polling shows President Trump's approval rating continues to slip. The latest Economist YouGov poll shows support for Trump's job performance has fallen to 34%. That's tied for a record low of both of Trump's terms in office. The poll shows 62% disapprove, producing a record net approval of negative 28.
Yeah, David French, these polls are, I was going to say all over the place. The president's polls aren't all over the place. His numbers obviously are lower than they've been. I've got to say, though,
very low.
Every couple of years, when you see a president's approval rating, you're going to know how off your elections are going to go. They're the greatest indicator of that. And yet, all of these polls that we're seeing on ballot tests between Republicans and Democrats, one day you'll see a poll that has Democrats up 87 points. The next it'll be 1. I mean, I exaggerate just a little bit, but they are all over the place. And when I see polls that show the Democrats only having a 1 or 2 point.
It's Jack. And what I found out. Today stopped me cold. Just over a year into his second term, Trump's once unshakable grip has quietly shifted, not collapsed, but weakened in ways those closest to power can feel. The president who seemed untouchable is now facing a new, more subtle dynamic of vulnerability. His approval is in the mid-30s. His endorsements are losing races they were supposed to win. Republicans in Congress are breaking with him on war powers votes in ways that simply didn't happen in his first term. His attacks on the Federal Reserve trigger stock market slides and dollar weakness that undermine his core economic brand.
Advantage despite everything that's going on, despite the worst, the most expensive grocery prices in 50 years, the highest gas prices, all of these other things going on. You sit there and wonder, man, do the Democrats have what it takes to win the elections, especially when it looks like the DNC's broke and the Republican Party has all the money?
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that Trump is president is all the proof that you need that the Democrats aren't that popular. So part of the Trump theory of the case, part of the theory of the case of MAGA is they don't actually have to be all that popular. They just have to be more popular than the Democrats. The old saying that you don't have to be the fastest person in the party. You just have to be faster than the slowest person if you're trying to outrun a bear. And so they're looking at the Democrats, and we've seen reporting that the Republicans are trying to turn it into a hate election that might be saying something along the lines of, as much as you don't like President Trump, the Democrats are worse. And that message is going to land on a lot of receptive ears, and it's going to especially land on receptive ears.
A major policy tracker cataloged over 100 separate ways his administration has weakened American security and global influence. And political commentators, including ones who are not his opponents, have started using words like lame duck to describe a president who is less than halfway through his second term. That is the story. Not that Trump is gone, not that his power has disappeared, but that the thing that made him seem invincible, the aura, the fear, the sense that crossing him was the most dangerous thing a Republican could do, that is eroding. And when a strong man starts looking weak, history tells us that is exactly when things get the most unpredictable and the most dangerous.
There's evidence of ideological radicalization in Democratic ranks. Because the problem with the Democratic Party was not that it was too moderate. The problem with the Democratic Party has long been its radicalization. And with now that renewing once again through this sort of DSA insurgents, the Republicans are looking at that and saying our approval ratings aren't going to tell the whole tale. At least that's their theory, as long as we can drive the Democratic approval ratings lower than ours.
Jonathan Lemire, your latest piece for The Atlantic is titled Trump Crashes into Reality, and you write in part this: recent months have delivered a reckoning for Trump, who has crashed hard against some real limits. The war in Iran, a conflict that he'd once thought would only take a few weeks, has hit a 5-month mark. Trump is also flailing domestically. His approval numbers have sunk, and Republicans are finally, in small doses, beginning to defy him. Once the midterms are over, Trump could face his worst fear: irrelevance. He will be a lame duck down to his final 2 years in office, and at some point...
Let's get into it. Start with the polls because the numbers are the foundation of everything else here, and they tell a story that is more dramatic than most people realize. Polling data has put Trump's approval rating at a number that is not just low in absolute terms, it is close to the lowest point of his entire political career, which came immediately after January 6th. The internal breakdown of that number is even more striking than the headline figure. Among Republicans, his own base approval had dropped significantly. That drop inside his own party is huge because the Republican base is the floor. It is the number that is supposed to be impervious to everything, to bad news cycles, to policy setbacks, to scandals.
Will no longer be the nation's top topic of conversation. Washington will turn its focus to the 2028 presidential campaign. With no incumbent in the race and no clear frontrunner in either party, it will be as wide open as any race in decades. Some of the president's allies have begun to privately wonder how he might handle a new reduced status. No one suspects that he'll take it well. I think there are some assumptions being made about the midterms that I won't argue right now. But one thing to be clear, Jonathan, this administration claimed this war was was over and they had done these decisive actions 2-3 weeks in, only to be proved horribly wrong.
No question there. I mean, Trump is someone who, look, through his remarkable decade at the pinnacle of American political power, has been able to sort of assert his own reality. He'll just say things over and over and over again. He'll lie through his teeth, and at least enough of the country will believe him. And he's so good at creating headlines that he's able to navigate out of jams that would have ended any other politician's career.
Republican voters have historically been willing to overlook an enormous amount to maintain their support for Trump. The fact that even that number is moving downward, that 1 in 6 Republicans who supported him enthusiastically at the start of the term is now expressing some degree of disapproval, tells you that the problems are deep enough and sustained enough to penetrate even the most loyal segment of his coalition. Among independents, the voters who actually decide elections in competitive districts, approval had fallen even more dramatically. A quarter of independent voters approve of his performance. That is not a governing coalition. That is not a midterm winning position. And among Democrats,
we have seen that stop working, dramatically so, most notably with Iran, where he has repeatedly said that the war is over. We win. It's over. It's done. It's not. He had to sign an MOU that was very favorable to Tehran. And even now, that's not holding. The Strait of Hormuz still in Iran's hands. And he can bluster as much as he wants about how things are going. The reality is there, that Iran, in many ways, is more powerful now than it was at the end of February. As for the domestic politics, yes, I mean, strategists that I talk to in both parties do think Democrats will likely take at least one of the houses of Congress. But to your point, Mika, of course, that's no guarantee. And we know Democrats are certainly very concerned. Republicans will do everything they can to suppress voter turnout, to put their thumb on the scale, to frankly, in the word of one Democrat I spoke to this week, try to steal it. That it's not a given that the Dems will take power. But if they do, right, and they can open investigations into President Trump, that will hinder his agenda for sure, but also hasten his lack of, or his fading relevance. He'll careen into what he would hate the most, Joe, which is the idea he might not be the most talked about person in America anymore.
It had dropped to essentially statistical noise, but the trend direction is the same everywhere you look. The reality is clear. Trump does not have the same sway he used to. His endorsements no longer guarantee wins. Some of his picks have lost in primaries and special elections. The political magic that seemed to work on nearly everything in his first term is producing noticeably worse results in his second. And that degradation in political effectiveness is visible and real, and is starting to change the calculations of the people around him. Now let's talk about what a lame duck president looks like when he is only halfway through his term. Because that framing, which has been appearing in more and more political commentary, tells you something important about how the people watching this most closely are interpreting what they are seeing. A lame duck is a president whose political power has diminished to the point where other political actors stop being afraid of him and start planning for what comes after him. It is a status that usually arrives in the final year of a final term, when everyone knows the clock is running out and the incentive to stay loyal collapses because there is no future political benefit to staying loyal to someone who cannot help you anymore. What is unusual, and what the commentators are flagging, is that Trump appears to be hitting lame duck dynamics significantly earlier than that. The GOP senators who backed the War Powers resolution to limit his Iran conflict. The House Republicans who could not hold the line on a vote designed to protect his commander-in-chief authority. The members who blocked his spending. The ones quietly working on tariff-limiting legislation. These are not the actions of a caucus that is terrified of its president. These are the actions of a caucus that is beginning to weigh its own survival against his approval in a way that is visibly and increasingly tilting towards self-preservation. And that shift from fear-driven loyalty to survival-driven calculation is the defining political transition of this moment. Let's go deeper because the polls and the congressional defections are the most visible signs of the erosion. But the dimensions of it extend much further into foreign policy, into the economy, into America's position in the world. And understanding all of those dimensions together is what lets you see the full picture of what is actually happening to this presidency right now. Start with the foreign policy piece because this is where the gap between the tough guy image and the actual outcomes is most glaring and most consequential. A policy tracker cataloged over 100 separate ways the Trump administration has weakened America's security, economy, and global influence. Over 100. From undercutting alliances, NATO relationships that took decades to build and that provide the structural foundation of American security in Europe, to mishandling the Iran war and the Venezuela operation in ways that generated international criticism and domestic economic pain simultaneously. The tracker documents how his tariff fights have strained relationships with trading partners that the United States needs for economic stability. How his attacks on multilateral institutions have handed China and Russia openings they have been trying to create for years. How his erratic, maximalist foreign policy style, which generates dramatic headlines and short-term attention, has produced long-term erosion in the trust and reliability that is the real currency of American global leadership. And the Iran situation is the single biggest example of all of this playing out in real time. Trump went in with maximalist threats, ultimatums, threats to strike and annihilate, the full theatrical apparatus of American military power. And the result was elevated oil prices, economic turbulence, a growing anti-war coalition in his own party, and an ongoing conflict that his own advisors privately wanted, wrapped up by a certain deadline, and that stretched well beyond that deadline. The gap between the image of strength and the reality of outcomes is not abstract. It is measured in gas prices and approval ratings, in the growing number of Republican senators willing to vote on War Powers resolutions that would have been unthinkable to advance against Trump 18 months ago. Now let's talk about the economy and the Federal Reserve episode because this one is particularly revealing about the difference between how Trump projects economic confidence and what actually happens in the markets when he governs. Trump publicly attacked Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, calling him a major loser and demanding immediate interest rate cuts. This is not subtle governance. This is the President of the United States publicly threatening the independence of the institution responsible for managing the American monetary system. And the markets reacted exactly the way you would expect markets to react when political uncertainty gets injected into the monetary policy environment. U.S. stocks fled. The dollar weakened. The market reaction was the financial community's real-time verdict on whether Trump's attacks on Powell were making the economic environment more or less stable. And the answer was unambiguously less stable. Now here is why that matters beyond the specific episode. Trump's core political brand, the thing that has always given him the most durable support from voters who do not necessarily agree with everything he does, is the idea that he is good for the economy, that he understands business, that he knows how to generate growth and prosperity in a way that career politicians do not. When his behavior triggers stock market slides and dollar weakness, When the markets visibly judge his conduct as destabilizing, that brand takes a direct hit, and brand damage in the economic credibility space is particularly hard to recover from because voters feel it in their retirement accounts and their grocery bills in ways that are immediate and personal. The abstract question of whether Trump's foreign policy is serving American interests is easier to dismiss. The concrete question of whether your 401k is lower than it was last month is not. Let's also talk about the specific War Powers episode in Congress, because it is the clearest example yet of how Republican loyalty to Trump has deteriorated on the issue that historically defines a president's power most completely. House Republicans actually called off a scheduled vote on a War Powers resolution designed to limit Trump's Iran conflict, not because they were confident they could defeat it, but because they realized they did not have the votes. Read that again. Republican House leadership pulled a vote because they did not trust their own members to vote the way the White House needed them to vote on war powers, the most fundamental expression of a president's commander-in-chief authority. In Trump's first term, the idea that House Republican leadership would have to pull a war powers vote because the caucus could not be trusted to hold the line would have been extraordinary. In his second term, it happened. And on the Senate side, multiple Republican senators backed a version of the resolution directly. The war powers defection is not just a policy story. It is a signal about the internal state of the relationship between the president and his congressional allies. When members of your own party start voting against your ability to conduct foreign policy without congressional approval, when the leadership has to cancel floor votes because the whip count is not there, the practical authority of the presidency is being constrained from within the president's own coalition. That is a different and more significant kind of weakness than losing a general election or getting bad press coverage. It is weakness at the operational level of governing, and it has real consequences for what Trump can actually do versus what he says he wants to do. Here is the paradox that the most thoughtful political observers are sitting with right now. A weakened Trump is not necessarily a less dangerous Trump. In some important ways, he may be more dangerous. Because a president who feels his grip slipping, who can see the approval numbers, who can see the congressional defections, who can see the midterm map moving in the wrong direction, is a president with incentives that are different from those of a president operating from a position of strength. A strong president can afford patience. He can afford strategic restraint. He can pick his battles and let some things go because he has the political capital to recover. A president who feels his power slipping tends to double down rather than pull back. He reaches for more extreme tools. He takes risks he would not take from a position of security. He becomes more aggressive, not less, because aggression is the only brand he knows how to run when things are not going his way. The immigration raids that have generated international attention, the Venezuela operation conducted without congressional authorization, the DOJ website deletions, the anti-weaponization fund. These are not the actions of a president who is feeling secure and patient. They are the actions of a president who is reaching harder for control precisely because the control is slipping. And that combination, diminishing public support, fracturing congressional coalition, eroding global influence, and an administration responding to all of it by swinging harder and reaching further, is the precise combination that makes the next several months genuinely unpredictable for the country and for anyone trying to understand where this goes from here. The commentators who called him a prize fighter doubled over from a gut punch were not saying he is finished. A fighter doubled over is still dangerous, still swinging. And the gut punch makes the next swing less controlled, not less powerful. That is the dynamic to watch, not whether Trump survives the approval rating decline. He probably does. But what he does in response to it, and whether the institutions and the people around him have enough left in them to absorb the swings that are coming. Let's bring it all together and talk about what this moment actually means for the administration, for the Republican Party, for America's position in the world, and for the voters who are trying to figure out what comes next. The first thing to understand is what eroding political power actually means in practical terms for a sitting president, because the word weakened can be misleading. Trump is not powerless. He still commands the executive branch. He still has the ability to conduct immigration raids, issue executive orders, direct the Justice Department, manage foreign policy, and use the full machinery of the federal government in ways that affect millions of people's lives every single day. The weakness is not absolute. It is relative. It is the difference between a president whose power is expanding and one whose power is contracting. And right now, every indicator is pointing in the contraction direction. His approval is down. His endorsements are losing. His congressional allies are defecting on key votes. His economic management is generating market instability. His foreign policy is producing diplomatic friction and military entanglements that are dragging on longer than planned. Relative to where he was at the start of the term, relative to the position of maximum political strength he appeared to occupy in January 2025, the trajectory is clearly and unmistakably downward. And that trajectory matters because political power is partly a function of perception. The fear that kept Republicans in line, that deterred legal challenges, that made foreign governments and domestic opponents cautious about pushing back, that fear was always partly a projection. It was based on the belief that crossing Trump came with consequences that were too severe to risk. As the approval numbers drop and the congressional defections accumulate and the midterm map shifts, the perceived cost of crossing him decreases. And as that cost decreases, more people are willing to do it, which makes the approval drop worse, which makes more people willing to cross it. It is a self-reinforcing cycle, and once it starts, it is very difficult to reverse. The second thing to understand is what the midterm implications of all this look like in concrete terms. A president with low approval going into a midterm election in a historical context where midterms consistently punish the party in power when presidential approval is low, with a congressional coalition that is visibly fracturing, and a candidate quality problem in competitive districts produced by revenge-driven primary purges. That is a recipe for significant losses in November. The specific number of seats that changes hands is impossible to predict with confidence this far out, but the direction is not particularly ambiguous right now. The map is moving against Republicans. The candidates being produced by Trump's primary process are not well positioned for general elections in swing districts. The national environment shaped by the Iran conflict, elevated energy prices, economic uncertainty, and the ongoing scandal stories is not generating the kind of positive momentum that allows a party to overcome structural headwinds in a midterm year. Republican strategists who are willing to say it on the record are using words like disaster. The ones who are not willing to say it on the record are saying the same thing anonymously to every reporter who will listen. And the ones who are not saying it at all, who are still performing total alignment with everything Trump wants, are doing their own private math and arriving at the same conclusions in silence. The political reality of this moment is not a secret inside the Republican Party. It is a conversation that is happening constantly in hallways and off-the-record calls and private strategy sessions. The question is not whether the party sees the problem. The question is whether they can do anything about it before November, and whether doing something about it individually is enough, or whether the problem requires the kind of collective action that no single member of Congress is in a position to organize right now. The ones who are breaking with Trump on specific votes, the war powers defections, are doing so because they have calculated that the political cost of staying fully in line with him is higher than the political cost of creating some visible distance between themselves and the most toxic elements of his second-term agenda. The one about America's position in the world is worth sitting with because it tends to get lost in the domestic political drama, but has consequences that extend far beyond the midterms. The policy tracker cataloging over 100 ways the administration has weakened American security and global influence is not a partisan attack document. It is a systematic accounting of specific policy decisions and their documented effects on alliance relationships, institutional credibility, economic partnerships, and strategic positioning. And what it shows, taken together, is that the administration's aggressive, transactional, maximalist approach to foreign policy has generated a set of outcomes that are genuinely difficult to characterize as American strength. NATO allies are more uncertain about American commitment than they have been in decades. China and Russia have taken advantage of the distraction and discord generated by the Iran conflict and Venezuela operation to advance their own interests in ways they could not have managed as easily against a more coherent and predictable American foreign policy. The dollar's reserve currency status, which is the foundation of American economic power globally, has been put under pressure by the combination of tariff fights, attacks on Federal Reserve independence, and the perception among international investors that American economic policy is being driven by political impulse rather than strategic calculation. These are not reversible overnight. Alliance relationships that take decades to build can be damaged much faster than they can be repaired. And the openings that rivals have taken while the administration was focused on Venezuela and Iran are not going to close on their own. The one that matters most for understanding what the next several months actually look like is the dangerous dynamic that the most perceptive observers are flagging. Because here is the uncomfortable truth about what happens when a president who defines himself through dominance and strength starts feeling that dominance slip. The tools of the presidency do not go away when approval ratings drop. The immigration raids do not stop. The executive orders do not stop. The ability to direct the Justice Department, to conduct foreign policy, to use the levers of executive power in ways that shape daily life for millions of Americans, none of that diminishes automatically with a bad poll number. What changes is the political calculus around restraint. A president operating from a position of strength can afford to be strategic. He can hold back. He can let things develop. He has the approval rating and the congressional support to absorb setbacks without reaching for extreme tools. A president operating from a position of weakness or perceived weakness does not have that luxury. He reaches for the dramatic move. He escalates when de-escalation would be wiser. He doubles down on the aggressive approach that is driving his numbers down because backing away from it would look like the weakness he is trying to deny. And that dynamic, the president swinging harder precisely because the grip is slipping, is what makes this particular political moment genuinely unpredictable in a way that a standard low-approval presidency would not be. Trump is not going to quietly accept the narrative that his power is fading. He is going to fight it loudly with whatever tools are available. And the question of what that fight looks like in the months between now and the midterms, what decisions get made, what lines get crossed, what moves get attempted, is the most important open question in American politics right now. Stay tuned, because when a strong man starts feeling the grip slip, he does not let go gracefully, and whatever comes next is not going to be quiet.